I'll just fire away. So
Sure.
I understand that the UAP has had a massive growth in membership recently.
Mm, mm.
What prompted you personally to want to join the party?
Yeah, mate. So everything that's been happening over the last 2 years, I've been following pretty closely because of how much it's impacted us, it's impacted everyone.
Yeah.
And it was. I was getting more and more despondent because the government mandates, the government's response wasn't easing. It was just progressively going further and further. Getting worse and worse. The control, and there was one point where I distinctly remember. It was a Monday night. I played basketball on Monday nights, and I got home, and a mate had texted, who's my campaign manager. He texted me this clip of they don't call Premier in Northern Territory. I think it's the Chief Minister.
Yeah, Chief Minister. Yeah.
And he was doing a press conference and saying how they've now got the federal police up there, and they have the army. And he's got the list of, I can't remember, this is a long time ago now, but, he's got the list of, say, 50 people and that have been in close contact with a COVID-positive person. And they're going to their homes and taking them from their homes, putting them in the army truck and taking them to the quarantine camps for 2 weeks. And I remember hearing that and just being really concerned, because, that was the most extreme that it had gotten to yet. That was another step further where whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, if you've been in close contact with a COVID-positive person, they're not even letting you isolate in your home. They're coming to your home, taking you against your will.
I see.
In a camp. And so that was a real low point, personally, during that. And this is him on press conference saying this, boasting almost about it, Well, I felt like he was, and he was saying, and I've spoken to ScoMo last night, he's sending us more army to back us up. And on that same week, I saw this online event, and I heard people like Malcolm Roberts and George Christensen and a bunch of different independent media share. And that was the first time I heard Craig Kelly speak. And that gave me some hope. It was the same week that it was like I was at my lowest point of hope. And then hearing all these politicians that are actually standing up and pushing back and fighting for our rights. And hearing Craig Kelly for the first time and him just in tears sharing about what's happening to our country just stirred something in me and made me think, mate, this guy's legit. This guy seems really authentic and like he actually cares. And so I started following him, listening to all of his, this YouTube and his parliamentary speeches. And every speech I'd listen to, it would pump me arm like, that's exactly what I believe. I agree with what he's saying. It also really disheartened me because every time he'd give a speech, that every other politician in the house would just be heckling him and cheering at him. And like, what is this place, He's the only one, questioning the government's approach, and he's just like getting bullied at school or something, And anyway, I aligned with what he was saying, and then there was a press conference that came out, and I think it was Clive that did it, and he said, hey, since Craig, answering your question is, since Craig has left the Liberal Party and joined United Australia and become the leader of the party, we've now had, over 80,000 people join the party, more than any other political party. And so he said, we've got Craig's leadership, we've got the members, and we've got Clive's, he said, we've got his financial backing to support the campaign, and he said, now we need people to put their hand up and fill out applications to be candidates. So that was the process. That was the journey for me, mate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask you. So it's kind of undeniable that for like the last couple years, and for even going into today, kind of the number one push for the UAP, at least in terms of marketing, has been COVID-centered, easing COVID restrictions, easing vaccine restrictions. So I'd like to ask you, at this point, less than 5% of the population hasn't gotten their second dose. COVID restrictions are kind of, at least in the many lived experience of those in the McPherson electorate, very few restrictions are still in place, and even less of them are enforced. I know that you can go into many buildings where the out the front it says show your vaccine, and you can just walk in. So I'd like to ask, for the vaccinated people, which is the overwhelming majority of people at the moment, why should they vote for the UAP?
Yeah, sure. Good question, mate. Good question. So two really important reasons. And your experience might be different from my experience, Brendan. It's Brendan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in my experience over the last 18 months, and I'm trying not to exaggerate here, but I would conservatively say that 9 out of 10 people that I speak to that have been vaccinated haven't chosen to be vaccinated because they thought that was the best option to protect themselves, right? 1 out of 10 person that has been vaccinated that I've met, and I've spoken to thousands of people, has done it because they thought, yes, I want to do this to protect myself, or which is their right. It's everybody's right, absolutely. I'm not anti-vaccine at all. However, 9 out of 10 of those people that have been vaccinated have done so because they wanted to keep their job, or because they wanted to travel, or because they wanted to go and see family that are interstate. They've been disconnected from family and loved ones. So even though the statistic is 95% have been vaccinated, out of that 95%, the majority, and this is just my experience, the majority have done so against their will. That's the coercion of the government, the control of the government. So that's the first thing. Firstly, even though, the vast majority of people have been vaccinated, they don't agree with how the government handled the situation. To force somebody to take a medical procedure, goes against the human right of bodily autonomy, Also, when there is a risk of death, which there is, doesn't matter how small that is, that's one of the, there are many potential side effects, and one of them is death, You cannot force a healthy person to receive a medical procedure that has the potential risk of death, coercively. Again, you can't force someone to do that. You can't, you under duress. That's what it is by law. Someone signs a contract, and even though, because people use the argument, say, they had a choice, they didn't have to do it. But if you sign a contract, and you did it, but later on the court finds out that they had threatened you with some sort of, punishment, or there were people that said, no, if you do this, if you don't sign it, we're going to do this to your family. That's called duress, and even though you sign the contract, it isn't valid.
I see.
Under duress.
I see.
So So that's the first thing. That even though yes they have taken it, there are. It was the first time I've been up speaking. These are all business owners, small business owners, and that morning, all the candidates spoke. The biggest response from the crowd, from the business owners, was when I spoke about introducing a Bill of Rights. And then I went into the details of the business owners, because they're having, as a business owner, what's the most important thing to your customers? And they're being forced to police who's allowed to come and shop at their shop. They are being forced by the government to turn away customers that want to come to their restaurant or come to their shop. You know what I mean? They're having to turn away the customers that they so desperately need when 33% of small businesses over COVID, went under.
Can I just ask?
Yes.
Polling shows. I wonder what's your response to this. Polling seems so far there hasn't been incredibly extensive stuff, but polling has shown that I think it's 80% of people support mandatory vaccines for health and disability care workers. So that implies a rather large portion of the population is in favour of these of at least the vaccines for as a concept for medical professionals.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what's the even the majority. This was back in September last year. This poll was carried out, and 70% of people seem to have supported vaccination as a condition of entry to sporting events, which is part of the duress you were talking about before. So if someone is vaccinated and at this point isn't really all that much concerned with, maybe they're sympathetic to the unvaccinated the cause, but is there any non-COVID related policies that?
Absolutely, mate. That's the second point. Yeah, absolutely. So the second point is our economy, mate, is in a dire situation. So the two major issues we have is we have over $1 trillion of debt, $1.4 trillion of debt.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about that. So if you could just elaborate on why that's such a big problem for Australia, why that issue is so important to you.
Yeah, okay. Because the European Central Bank have done studies on this. They've done studies on the correlation between big public debt and rise in interest rates, right?
Yeah.
So number one, sorry?
I said yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is, with countries that have massive amounts of debt like we do, what they found is that over the first 2 years, the interest rates only nominally increase. But then when it gets to 2 years, which is what we're coming up to now, they will double. And when you apply to Australia's data, it won't just double, it'll quadruple. Now, so that's the one problem is the interest rate. The interest rate because of how much debt we're in. And we just saw it last week. The Federal Reserve already bumped it up, already bumped the interest rate up. Here's the problem, right? Over 40% of homeowners that have a mortgage are already under mortgage stress. When the interest rate goes from 2 to 4%, 60% of homeowners that have a mortgage will default on their mortgages and lose their homes. When it goes from 4 to 6%, 80% of Australian homeowners that have a mortgage will default on their mortgages and they'll lose their home.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to talk about that issue, because it was one of the things that, in doing a bit of research prior to this conversation, I had a lot of questions about. So, it's been on billboards everywhere. Like, if we're not counting like COVID and vaccines, it's probably been the biggest push the UAP has done for the capping interest rates. So, if a bank, say, needs a 4%, because they raise an interest rate to like 4%, if they to maintain profitability. So if for example, they needed a 4% interest rate to maintain profitability, but it was capped at 3%, then they would stop. They would just stop giving out mortgages. However, I know Craig Kelly has offered a solution for this. I've done a bit of research. So Craig Kelly clarified this by saying that the government could issue treasury bonds, which would then subsidise the banks, maintain profitability, and also keep the interest rates capped.
Yeah.
Now my issue with this is that so I just did a bit of maths, bit of like research. So the average mortgage now stands at $600,000, which is crazy. Sure. So obviously there's a big issue here among 6 million mortgages. So if the government had to subsidise just 1 year of payments on those mortgages, it would at what usually would be a 4% interest, so subsidising 1% of that interest rate, that would involve issuing $24 billion worth of treasury bonds, which would then be, after, depending on whether they're issued at 0.1% or 0.2%, plus anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion of interest. And I know that Clive Palmer has speculated about a 6% interest rate, which would then be $60 billion of treasury bonds in 1 year. And treasury bonds would eventually have to be paid back. So I'm just wondering, for clarification, how are we going to be lowering the national debt when we're issuing treasury bonds that could amount to $24 billion added to the national debt every year, plus interest?
Sure. Good stuff. So, a couple of important things. Firstly, the repaying the debt is a whole nother strategy. Now, we will repay the debt by putting the 15% tariff on countries that import our iron ore, right?
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it is we provide, I think it's over 70% of the iron ore to the Asian countries.
Yeah, it's $117 billion worth of the in value exporters of iron ore. Yeah.
So by putting the 15% tariff on the iron ore for those countries, within 20 years we'll be able to pay off the $1 trillion debt. The current repayment plan of the current Liberal government is to pay it off in over 150 years.
Yeah.
150 years. So that's that's going to cause inflation to continue to rise and the interest rates to continue to rise.
So, so the iron ore tax levy is considerable. Like I believe it's $117 billion exported yearly. 15% of that is around $17.5 billion, which is a lot of money. However, I'm still having trouble reconciling the $24 billion in treasury bonds that could be issued in a year if banks need to maintain profitability at 4% interest. So, like, that's still a difference of what, $7.5 billion, or $6.5 billion. Like, are there other taxes that come into this? Other redirection of funds that?
No, so Brandon, the reality is, I'm not in the detail of the financial plan. You know what I mean? That's where we have a treasurer. That's where we have a shadow finance minister.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so they're the guys that work out the details. You know, the main questions people have, you know, or criticisms have been, government doesn't have the power to do this, to cap the interest rate at 3%, right? Which, you know, we've replied with yes, they do under Section 51 of the Constitution.
Yeah,
and it's shown by the fact that two governments have done it in the past.
Yeah.
Right?
Before 1970, the interest rate was capped.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and then the bank's profitability. That's the other one, right? And that's where, you mentioned Clive's. I've heard Craig. You mentioned Craig's. I've heard Clive speak on that as well. And you know, they've obviously got the finer detail on how that all works, which they'll need to make clear. And good on you for looking into it.
Yeah, because I haven't seen this.
Yeah, sure.
This be reconciled. The very heavy emphasis on the national debt, and then treasury bonds, which are by definition a direct addition to the national debt. I'm having trouble reconciling that.
I mean, here's one absolute positive is that the tariff, you know what I mean, in the international community, Indonesia have the same sort of tariff on the export of their nickel, for example, right? So that's a solution, you know what I mean? Whereas on paying back the debt. Whereas currently, the Liberal Party don't have a solution on the paying back of the debt. It's 150 years, you know? That's not a solution. That's going to be a burden that we're going to carry, our kids are going to carry, their kids are going to carry, and so on. We need a solution, you know? And we've got one with that tariff.
Okay.
Now, with the interest rate, you know, and the banks, when Clive was asked about this and how the banks are going to fare, and he said, you know, they've got the plans on that. But he said the reality is this is a pending disaster. If 80% of homeowners lose their homes, you know, mortgage homeowners lose their homes, this is going to be an absolute disaster in Australia. You know, now the details you talk about are very important. You know, like I said, that's why we got specialist ministers that sort all that stuff out. I wish I could give you more detail. However, if we don't do something drastic like capping the interest rate at 3%, then that's going to be a disaster. You know, we got to do something like that, and it scares me that the major parties don't have any solutions. It scares me even more that the solution Labor came out with last week for them to own half your home, to buy 40% of people's homes. That's the most worrying thing I've heard. You know, there's a lot of worrying stuff, but that's what we have to move away from. That's why I'm running. You know, I'm not a career politician. I'm doing this out of necessity. I'm doing this because of the way the government is controlling people and taking away their rights. And now the Labor's solution to the fact that people are going to lose their homes with the interest rates continuing to rise is the government will own half of your home. You know what I mean? I know if that worries you, mate, but that is very, very concerning to me.
I'd just like to ask how you feel about sort of different policies, because you said that no other party has a solution for these problems. But I wonder what you think of the solution proffered by the Greens, which is a 40% super profits tax on corporations, which, according to them and according to the Independent Parliamentary Budget Office, would raise about $338 billion over 10 years. And then using that to fund social housing and kind of like offset the increases by offering a public option alternative, which would then, due to supply and demand, would lower the prices of regular houses. What is your opinion on that solution, and why isn't that a sufficient solution?
I haven't looked into that. However, I would much prefer just hearing that. What was the tax on, sorry?
Corporate super profit. So it's for corporations that have over $100 million in profits.
Right.
So it would, yeah. And then they also propose 6% taxes on billionaires, etc., etc. But their super profits tax would pay for their housing proposal as well.
Yeah. So I would far prefer a solution that helps people to own their own home, rather than the government owning people's homes, rather than the government providing homes and people not having the opportunity to own their homes. Right?
Yeah.
I'm all absolutely about providing, social welfare for those that are doing a tough and need support, absolutely. But I would much prefer a solution where we're not essentially conceding defeat and saying, hey, the government's going to provide homes for everyone.
Yeah.
So I think by the measures that we're putting into place, it isn't just obviously the capping the home loan is a temporary measure to save those 80% of homeowners from losing their homes, but it's also saving the government from having to come in and take control and take ownership, and then we've got a whole raft of other policies to help people to be able to save, to help people to be able to own their own home. One of them is just lowering or cutting the 50% tax on people's second jobs. That policy itself that we currently have makes no sense to me. That we're putting an obstacle in the way of people that want to work. Taxing them 50% on the second job, it's just putting them off. That's crazy. If people want to work two jobs, that's going to help with the shortfall of businesses that are looking for extra workers, that people can know I can go and do an extra few hours here and there, and I'm going to actually get paid a good amount for it, and it's going to help with the cost of it, and it's going to help me to save to buy a house, rather than putting them off. It's a de-incentive to say we're going to tax you. Anyone that wants to work more than one job, we're going to take 50% of it. That's a terrible, terrible tax. Getting rid of the HEX debt, takes away the liability for people to be able to borrow money to get their first home as well. We got a whole bunch. The 20% tax concession for a rural community, anyone that's 200 kilometres away from a major city. That's going to help bring people out and support these rural, which is the backbone of our country, the rural community. And it's going to help take the pressure off the property market in our cities, because we're pushing everyone away from our rural communities into the cities, and the infrastructure currently can't handle it. And it's going to prop up these rural communities, and it's going to give people a greater opportunity to go and buy their own home and have a lower cost of living as well. obviously repaying the debt is going to help lower inflation by investing the $1 trillion of super. One out of the 3.5 that we have, Australia has $3.5 trillion of super. So by taking $1 trillion of that $3.5 trillion and reinvesting it into Australian projects, that's going to really boost the economy. It's going to provide a heap of jobs, and it's going to build our infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it's actually going to sow into our country rather than it's our super, it's Australian super that's been invested into other countries. So to bring a third of that back.
I see.
Got a whole lot of just. One of the reasons I love these policies, mate, because you're talking about what do we offer apart from people's rights, and all our policies regarding economics are just common sense, basic policies that helps take pressure off people, helps take burden off people, and keep more money in their back pocket. The business one, we got one that says stop requiring businesses from paying the provisional tax. So rather than them having to pay in advance for profits they're yet to make every month, paying the PAYG tax, just pay it at the end of the year on the money you've made. So you're not having to. One of the biggest pressures on small business owners is having to pay their employees and then having to pay this tax on money they haven't earned yet. So instead of that, actually using the capital that they have, the profit that they have, to reinvest into their business, to grow their business, that's going to help businesses to survive. It's going to help people. We just want to make it as simple as possible and take pressure off people. These aren't just policies because we need policies. They're just well thought out, ideas. And here's something that I heard Clive say, which stuck with me when he did the National Press Club, and all the reporters, trying to trying to get him, and one of the reporters said, "Hey, you spent, I don't know, 80 million on the last election, whatever it was, and you didn't win any seats." And she said, what would a win be for you this election? And he said, look, if Labor and Liberal, if Albanese and ScoMo came in here today and listened to these policies and they took them away and they actually used them to help the Australian people, they used them to save people's homes, to repay the $1 trillion of debt, to help with Australian standard of living, that would be a win. That would be worth everything we're investing into this election. And he said, politics isn't about power, it's about helping people. And to be honest with you, that's the only reason I'm doing this, mate. I'm not a career politician. This is not what I've done. I've worked in the local community the last 15 years. But I realise, mate, we need policies and we need solutions that are actually thinking about people, that are going to help people. And I want to be a part of the solution.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Thanks for talking with me.
Anytime, mate. Anytime.
Yeah.
Seriously. Good on you.